You're 5 months pregnant, and your millionaire husband just vanished from a restaurant, leaving you with the bill. Humiliating, right? But for Nora Croft, that was just the start. The next morning, there's no apology. Instead, her powerful mother-in-law is at her door, not with comfort, but with the police. Suddenly, Nora is not just the abandoned wife. She's an accused criminal. This is the story of how a powerful family tried to erase a woman, and how that woman decided to fight back with a secret they never knew she could find. The crystal glasses at Aurelia seemed to sweat in the humid Chicago evening, mirroring the fine sheen of perspiration on Nora's temples. It was a place designed to feel like a secret, tucked away on a cobblestone street in the Gold Coast, with velvet ropes and a maitre d' who sized up your net worth before offering a smile. For the past 2 years, this had been her world. A world curated by her husband, Mason Harper. Mason, with his sharp, tailored suits and a smile that could disarm world leaders, was the heir to a logistics empire. Nora had met him not at a charity gala or a yacht club, but in the quiet aisles of a university library where she'd been a graduate student in art history. He'd been charmingly persistent, quoting poets she loved and pretending to be fascinated by 14th century Italian frescoes. He had seemed like a port in a storm, a man of substance in a world she often found shallow. Now, sitting across from him, she felt a familiar, creeping unease. The restaurant was his choice, as all their choices were. He'd ordered for her, the pan-seared scallops. "Light enough for the baby," he'd said with a wink to the waiter, as if their unborn child was a shared, delightful secret. But lately, his secrets felt less delightful and more like locked doors. "You're quiet tonight, Nora," Mason observed, swirling the deep red wine in his glass, a vintage that cost more than her first car. He hadn't touched his own meal, his plate of seared foie gras remaining a perfect, untouched sculpture. "Just tired," she murmured, placing a hand over the gentle swell of her belly. At 5 months pregnant, a bone-deep weariness had settled into her. It wasn't just the pregnancy. It was the emotional weight of their life together. The lavish parties where she felt like another one of his acquisitions. The passive-aggressive comments from his mother, Beatrice. The way Mason would dismiss her career ambitions with a patronizing pat on the head. "It's been a long week. Has it?" he asked, his tone laced with a detached amusement she'd come to despise. "I thought your biggest challenge was picking out a color for the nursery. Did Dove White or Eggshell win out in the end?" A flush of anger, hot and swift, rose in her chest. She had spent the week finalizing a freelance research project for a local gallery, a small gig she'd fought to keep despite Mason's protests that she didn't need to dabble. He knew this, but he preferred the narrative of her as a kept woman, concerned only with domestic trifles. "The project went well, Mason. The curator was very pleased." She kept her voice even, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "And for the record, we're going with a soft gray." He smirked, taking a slow sip of his wine. "Gray. How pragmatic." His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned the room, dismissing her. It was his signature move, the conversational checkmate. He'd draw her in, prick her with a carefully chosen barb, and then withdraw his attention, leaving her to bleed out emotionally while he moved on to more important matters. Tonight, his distraction was his phone, which buzzed incessantly on the table beside him. He'd glance at it, a flicker of something, annoyance, anxiety, crossing his features before he smoothed them back into a mask of indifference. "Is everything all right?" she asked, the question tasting like a concession. She hated that she still craved his reassurance. "Everything is perfect," he said, the words too sharp, too precise. He finally looked at her, but his gaze was unnervingly vacant, as if he were looking straight through her. "Just business. A deal in Singapore is hitting a snag." It was always a deal, a snag, a complication somewhere across the globe that required his immediate, undivided attention. It was the perfect excuse for his emotional absenteeism. For months, their conversations had been a series of these deflections. She'd try to talk about their future, about the baby, about her fears and hopes, and he would build a wall of corporate jargon and vague promises. A waiter appeared, silent as a wraith, to clear their plates. Mason waved away the dessert menu. "Just the check, please." The finality in his voice sent a shiver down Nora's spine. The air in the opulent room suddenly felt thin, suffocating. The unease that had been simmering all evening began to boil. "Are we leaving so soon?" she asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "I thought we could walk by the lake." It was a desperate plea for a moment of connection, a return to the early days when they would walk for hours, their hands intertwined, their conversations flowing as easily as the water. Mason sighed, a long, theatrical sound of impatience. "Nora, I have an early flight. I just told you about the Singapore deal." He picked up his phone, his thumbs moving rapidly across the screen. "And besides, you need your rest." He was already gone. He was sitting right in front of her, the man who was the father of her child. Yet he was a million miles away, lost in a world she was not welcome in. The check arrived in a small leather folio. Mason placed his black credit card on top of it, without even looking at the total. He stood up, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt. "I'm going to the washroom before we head out." He leaned down, but instead of kissing her, he brushed his lips against her hair, a gesture so devoid of affection it felt like a dismissal. She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders cutting a confident path through the crowded dining room. He didn't look back. Nora's hand instinctively went to her belly again, a protective gesture. The baby kicked, a soft, fluttering movement that was both a comfort and a source of profound sadness. "Your father is a ghost, little one," she thought, a tear finally escaping and tracing a cold path down her cheek. She waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The waiter returned with the credit card, but Mason hadn't come back to sign. 10 minutes, 15. The ambient chatter of the restaurant started to sound like a roar in her ears. A knot of pure dread tightened in her stomach. She discreetly scanned the room, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. No sign of him. With trembling hands, she pulled out her own phone and called him. It rang once, twice, then went straight to voicemail. "Mason, where are you? Is everything okay?" She whispered into the phone, her voice cracking. She tried again. Voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She flagged down their waiter. "Excuse me, my husband went to the washroom about 20 minutes ago. Could you possibly check on him?" The waiter, a young man with kind eyes, gave her a sympathetic look and nodded. He returned a few minutes later, his expression grim. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, he's not there. One of the valets said he saw a man matching his description leave through the front entrance about 15 minutes ago. He got into a town car and left." The words hit her like a physical blow. The air rushed out of her lungs. It couldn't be. It was a mistake, a misunderstanding. Mason wouldn't just leave, but he had. He had left her. Pregnant, alone, and with a dinner bill that was probably more than she had in her checking account. The waiter placed the leather folio back on the table. Her eyes fell on the black card sitting on top. It wasn't Mason's Centurion card. It was hers. A debit card from the joint account he'd set up for her, the one he called her allowance. The account he could close at any moment. The message was clear. It wasn't a mistake. It was a statement. Her world, so carefully constructed, so gilded and fragile, shattered. The world tilted. For a moment, Nora was sure she would be sick right there on the pristine white tablecloth. The waiter's words echoed in the cavernous space of her mind. He got into a town car and left. The sentence was so simple, so clinical, yet it detonated her reality, leaving behind a ringing silence. Her first instinct was denial. A hot, fierce wave of it. There had to be an explanation, a sudden emergency, a call so critical he couldn't even spare 30 seconds to tell her. But even as the excuses formed, they crumbled against the cold, hard evidence on the table. Her debit card. He hadn't accidentally left his own. He had deliberately swapped it. This was a calculated act, a meticulously planned departure. Her gaze swept the dining room. A few patrons shot her curious glances, their eyes lingering a moment too long. She could feel their pity, their judgment. The woman who was left behind. The story they would tell their friends tomorrow. Did you see that poor woman at Aurelia last night? Her husband just walked out on her. The thought sent a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her, so potent it made her dizzy. She had to get out of there. But the bill, a 3-figure monster, sat between her and the door like a sentinel. She opened the leather folio, her fingers clumsy and numb. The amount stared back at her, obscene in its extravagance. It was more than she'd made in the entire last month from her research project. Mason knew this. He knew the limits of her allowance. This wasn't just abandonment. It was a punishment. But for what? Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She took a deep breath, trying to anchor herself. Think, Nora, just think. She couldn't make a scene. That's what he would expect. He'd probably relish the thought of her, hysterical and helpless, making a fool of herself. She would not give him that satisfaction. With a resolve she didn't know she possessed, she signaled the waiter. He approached the table cautiously, his professional smile tinged with genuine concern. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Nora said, her voice surprisingly steady. She was proud of that. It didn't tremble or crack. "My husband had an urgent matter to attend to. I'll be settling the bill." She slid her debit card towards him. The moment he picked it up, a cold dread washed over her. What if Mason had already emptied the account? What if this was part of the cruelty, to have her card declined in front of a room full of strangers? She held her breath as the waiter walked away, the seconds stretching into an agonizing eternity. She focused on a point on the far wall, a painting of a Venetian canal, its colors muted and serene. She tried to transport herself there, to a world of beauty and history. A world before Mason, before the gilded cage had closed around her. She remembered the girl she used to be, the one who would spend her last $20 on a used book and a coffee, and feel like the richest person in the world. Where had that girl gone? The waiter returned, his face unreadable. He placed the receipt and a pen on the table. "Everything is all set, ma'am." Relief, so powerful it almost made her weep, flooded through her. He hadn't cut her off. Not yet. The cruelty had its limits, for now. She signed the receipt, her signature a shaky imitation of its usual confident scrawl. She left a generous tip, a small act of defiance, a refusal to be seen as the victim she felt like. As she stood, her legs felt unsteady, like a newborn foal's. She gathered her small clutch, her movements slow and deliberate. She refused to scurry out in shame. Head held high, she walked through the restaurant, her gaze fixed on the heavy oak doors at the entrance. She could feel the eyes on her back, but she didn't flinch. She was an art historian, trained to observe. Now she was the exhibit, a portrait of a woman on the verge of collapse, framed by the opulent decor of a life that was no longer hers. The cool night air hit her as she stepped onto the cobblestone street. It was a relief after the stuffy, judgmental atmosphere of the restaurant. She leaned against the cold brick of the building, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The city sounds, the distant wail of a siren, the laughter from a nearby bar, seemed to come from a great distance. She tried calling Mason again. Voicemail. She sent a text, her thumbs shaking so badly she had to type it 3 times. Mason, I don't understand. Where are you? Please call me. The message delivered, but no reply came. The valet, a young man with a kind face, approached her. Mrs. Harper, is your car coming? Her car. Mason's car. The sleek, black Mercedes he'd bought her for her birthday. The car that was registered in his name. She felt a fresh pang of fear. Was that gone too? She gave him the ticket, her heart in her throat. After a few minutes that felt like hours, the familiar headlights rounded the corner. Another small mercy. She drove home in a daze, the city lights blurring into abstract streaks of color. The 20-minute drive to their Lincoln Park brownstone felt like a journey across a foreign land. Every street corner, every landmark, seemed to mock her with shared memories. That was the park where he'd proposed. That was the cafe where they'd had their first date. That was the theater where they'd seen that play she loved, and he'd fallen asleep. Her life was a museum of a love that had perhaps never been real. Had it all been a lie? The charming poet in the library, the whirlwind romance, the perfect wedding. Was it all a performance? And if so, why? When she pulled into their private garage, the house was dark and silent. The emptiness of it was a physical presence, a cold, heavy blanket that smothered her. She walked through the marble foyer, her footsteps echoing in the silence. The house, which had once felt like a symbol of their success, now felt like a mausoleum. It was his house, filled with his furniture, his art, his taste. She was just a temporary resident. She went straight to their bedroom. His closet was half empty. His favorite suits, the ones he wore for business trips, were gone. His watchbox was open, the space where his Rolex usually sat, empty. His travel bag was missing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He had packed. He had planned this. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it stole her breath. It wasn't just that he had left. It was the how of it. The public humiliation, the calculated cruelty, the silent, chilling efficiency of his departure. He hadn't just ended their marriage. He had tried to erase her, to strip her of her dignity, to leave her with nothing. She sank onto the edge of their king-sized bed, the bed they had shared, the bed where their child had been conceived. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from her throat. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated grief. She wrapped her arms around her belly, her body shaking with the force of her sorrow. "It's okay, little one," she whispered to the unborn child, the words a desperate lie. "We're going to be okay." But as she sat there, alone in the cavernous, silent house, with the ghost of her husband's cologne still hanging in the air, she had never felt less okay in her entire life. The echo of his abandonment was all that was left. Sleep was a distant country Nora couldn't reach. She spent the night drifting in a gray twilight of shock and despair, her mind replaying the scene at Aurelia on a torturous loop. Every detail was seared into her memory. The glint of Mason's cufflinks as he stood up, the vacant look in his eyes, the final dismissive brush of his lips against her hair. Each time the memory played, the betrayal cut deeper. She wandered through the silent house like a ghost, her bare feet cold against the polished hardwood floors. She found herself in the nursery, the room that was supposed to be a sanctuary of hope. The soft gray paint she'd chosen now seemed bleak and funereal. The unassembled crib, still in its box, felt like a monument to a future that had been stolen from her. She ran her hand over the smooth, cool wood of the rocking chair she'd picked out, the one she'd imagined herself in, humming lullabies to her baby. The image was so clear, so painful, it brought a fresh torrent of tears. By the time the first pale light of dawn crept through the windows, Nora was emotionally and physically exhausted. Her eyes were swollen and raw, and a dull headache throbbed at her temples. The baby was quiet, as if sensing its mother's distress. The thought of the tiny, innocent life inside her was the only thing that kept her from completely shattering. She had to be strong. For the baby. She forced herself to go through the motions of a normal morning. A shower, a cup of decaf tea, her hands shaking so badly she nearly spilled it. She tried to eat a piece of toast, but her throat was too tight, and the food tasted like cardboard. She knew she had to do something. She couldn't just sit here and wait. But what? Call his parents, his friends, the police? The thought of talking to anyone, of having to voice the humiliating truth of what had happened, was mortifying. My husband walked out on me in the middle of dinner. It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. Just as she was trying to summon the courage to call her own parents, who were retired and living a quiet life in Michigan, the doorbell chimed. Its melodic tone, usually a welcome sound, now felt like an intrusion, an alarm. Her heart leaped into her throat. Mason. For a wild, hopeful moment, she thought it was him. He'd come back. It was all a terrible, cruel joke, a misunderstanding. He would have a story, an explanation, and he would wrap her in his arms and everything would be all right again. She rushed to the door, her bare feet slapping against the marble floor. She peered through the peephole, her hope instantly turning to ice in her veins. It wasn't Mason. It was his mother. Beatrice Harper stood on the doorstep, a vision of icy elegance. She was dressed in a crisp, cream-colored pantsuit, her silver hair styled in a perfect, immovable coif. Her face, which Nora had once mistaken for serene, now looked like a mask carved from granite. In her hand, she clutched a designer handbag like a weapon. Nora's hand trembled as she unlocked the door. 1,000 questions swirled in her mind. Did she know? Had Mason called her? Was she here to offer comfort, an explanation? "Beatrice," Nora said, her voice hoarse. "Come in." Beatrice swept past her without a word, her expensive perfume filling the foyer. She didn't look at Nora. Instead, her sharp, critical eyes scanned the entryway as if looking for flaws. She stopped in the center of the living room, her back to Nora, a rigid, imposing figure. "I expected to hear from you last night," Beatrice said, her voice as cold and sharp as a shard of glass. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Nora's confusion deepened. "Hear from me. Beatrice, I don't understand. Something happened. Mason." "Oh, I know what happened," Beatrice cut her off, finally turning to face her. The look on her face was one of pure, unadulterated contempt. There was no sympathy in her eyes, no trace of concern, only a chilling, reptilian coldness. "My son called me. He told me everything." Relief, foolish and misplaced, flickered in Nora's chest. "He called you? Is he okay? Where is he?" Beatrice let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Is he okay? That's rich, coming from you. He's devastated, of course. Humiliated. But he's a survivor. He'll get through this." The world started to spin again. Humiliated? Devastated? Was she talking about the same man who had coolly and deliberately abandoned his pregnant wife? "I don't understand," Nora whispered, her voice barely audible. "He left me." "Don't you dare play the victim with me, Nora!" Beatrice hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. She took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. "Mason finally found out the truth about you, about your lies, about the baby. The last two words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. "The baby?" Nora repeated, her hand flying to her stomach in a protective gesture. "What about the baby?" "Don't pretend you don't know," Beatrice sneered. "My son is many things, but he is not a fool. He knows that child is not his." The accusation was so monstrous, so outrageously false, that for a moment Nora couldn't even process it. It was like being struck by lightning on a clear day. The shock was so profound it left her numb, speechless. "What?" she finally managed to choke out, the word a strangled gasp. "That's insane. That's a lie." "Is it?" Beatrice's lips curled into a cruel smile. "Mason has his doubts. And frankly, so have I. You were always too ambitious for your own good, weren't you? The poor little art student snagging the millionaire heir. It was all a little too perfect. A baby was just the next logical step in your plan, wasn't it? The ultimate insurance policy." The venom in her words was suffocating. Nora felt like she was drowning in it. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a character assassination, a carefully constructed narrative designed to destroy her. "That's not true," Nora said, her voice shaking with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I love Mason, and this baby is his. How could you even suggest something so vile?" "Because my son's happiness is the only thing that matters to me," Beatrice said, her voice rising. "And you have made him miserable. You have trapped him, manipulated him. But it's over. He's free of you now." The pieces started to click into place, forming a picture of a conspiracy so cold-blooded it was almost unbelievable. Mason's emotional distance, his strange behavior, the meticulously planned exit. It was all connected. This wasn't just him leaving her. It was a coordinated attack. "Where is he?" Nora demanded, a new strength, born of righteous fury, surging through her. "I want to talk to him. He needs to tell me this to my face." "You will not be speaking to my son," Beatrice declared, her voice ringing with an authority that was absolute. "He is on his way to Singapore, where he will be for the foreseeable future. He has left instructions. You are to vacate this house by the end of the week. His lawyers will be in touch regarding the formalities. Vacate the house." The words were a death sentence to the life she knew. She was being thrown out, discarded like a piece of trash. Pregnant, alone, and now homeless. "You can't do this," Nora said, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down her face. "This is my home. I'm carrying his child." "You're carrying a child," Beatrice corrected her, her voice dripping with malice. "And as for this house, my dear, your name is on none of the paperwork. You have no claim to anything. You are, and always have been, a guest here. And your stay is over." Beatrice turned to leave, her mission accomplished. She had delivered her poison, shattered Nora's world, and was now ready to walk away, leaving Nora to bleed out in the ruins. But as she reached the door, she paused and turned back, a final chilling thought crossing her mind. "Oh, and Nora," she said, her voice deceptively sweet. "Don't even think about fighting this. Mason has the best lawyers in the country. If you try to make a scene, if you try to claim that child is his without irrefutable proof, we will not only fight you, we will ruin you. We will paint you as a gold-digging adulteress, and we will make sure you never see a cent. Is that clear?" The threat, so blatant and brutal, hung in the air. It was a declaration of war. And Nora, standing alone in the silent, opulent house, knew that she was hopelessly outgunned. The silence that Beatrice left in her wake was more deafening than any shout. It was a void, a vacuum where Nora's life used to be. For a long time, she stood frozen in the living room, the ghost of her mother-in-law's perfume and the poison of her words hanging heavy in the air. The accusation, that child is not his, was a splinter of ice in her heart, spreading its chill through her entire body until she was numb. This wasn't just a breakup. It was an erasure. They weren't just leaving her. They were trying to rewrite history, to paint her as the villain in a story she didn't even know she was in. The precision of it all was what terrified her the most. Mason's disappearance, the packed bags, Beatrice's immediate arrival, the pre-packaged lies, the legal threats. This was a coup, planned with military precision. A wave of nausea, sour and acidic, rose in her throat. She stumbled to the downstairs bathroom, her body convulsing as she retched into the toilet. There was nothing in her stomach to bring up, only the bitter taste of betrayal. She collapsed onto the cold tile floor, her cheek pressed against the cool porcelain, her body trembling with a toxic cocktail of grief, rage, and fear. How could this be happening? How could the man who had quoted Rilke to her in a dusty library, the man who had held her hand and promised her a lifetime of adventures, be capable of such calculated cruelty? And Beatrice, the woman who had smiled through their wedding photos, who had hosted their engagement party, who had feigned maternal affection for 2 years. Had it all been a lie? The numbness began to recede, replaced by a white-hot anger. An anger so pure and clarifying it burned away her tears. They thought she would crumble. They thought she would pack her bags, disappear with her tail between her legs, and accept the narrative they had created for her. They had underestimated her. They had mistaken her kindness for weakness, her love for naivety. With a surge of adrenaline, she pushed herself up from the floor. She splashed cold water on her face, staring at her reflection in the ornate mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, her face pale and drawn. She looked like a victim, but she didn't feel like one. Not anymore. She marched back into the living room, her mind racing. Lawyers. Beatrice had threatened her with lawyers. That meant they were expecting a fight. It also meant they had something to hide. People who have the truth on their side don't need to resort to such elaborate, vicious tactics. Her first instinct was to call her parents. But what would she say? How could she explain this monstrous, unbelievable situation? They would worry themselves sick, and they didn't have the resources to fight a titan like the Harper family. No, she couldn't drag them into this. Not yet. She needed proof. Proof that the baby was Mason's. Proof that their marriage was real. Proof that she wasn't the person they were painting her to be. Her mind seized on one thing: the prenatal appointments. Dr. Evans, her obstetrician. The records would show everything: the conception date, the ultrasounds, the genetic screenings. It was all there, in black and white. But as she reached for her phone to call the doctor's office, a new, colder fear gripped her. The appointments had been booked by Mason's assistant. The clinic was one of the most exclusive in the city, one that catered to the wealthy elite. A place where discretion was paramount, a place where records could be managed. Could Mason's influence extend that far? Could he have already gotten to them? The paranoia was a physical thing, making her skin crawl. She felt like she was in a spy thriller, a pawn in a game where she didn't even know the rules. Just then, the doorbell rang again. This time the sound was sharp, aggressive, not melodic. Her body tensed. Was it Beatrice, back for another round of psychological warfare? She crept to the door, her heart pounding. Through the peephole, she saw 2 people: a man in a sharp, dark suit, and a woman in a police uniform. Her blood ran cold. She opened the door a crack, her hand shaking. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit, who had the cold, predatory eyes of a shark, flashed a badge. "Ma'am, I'm Detective Miller, Chicago PD, and this is Officer Davis. We'd like to ask you a few questions." "Questions? About what?" Nora asked, her voice a reedy whisper. "We've received a complaint," Detective Miller said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "From Mrs. Beatrice Harper, on behalf of her son, Mr. Mason Harper." Nora felt the floor drop out from under her. This was it. The next phase of the attack. A complaint about what? She managed to ask. The complaint alleges theft and fraud, the detective said, his eyes boring into hers. Specifically, the unauthorized use of a credit card and the theft of several valuable personal items, including a Patek Philippe watch. The world swam before Nora's eyes. The dinner, the credit card he had left for her, the watch that was missing from his closet. They weren't just accusing her of adultery, they were pressing criminal charges. They were trying to put her in jail. That's absurd, she stammered, her mind reeling. He left the card for me, to pay for the dinner, and I haven't stolen anything. He packed his own bags. We just need to ask you a few questions, ma'am, Detective Miller repeated, his tone making it clear it wasn't a request. May we come in? She was trapped. If she said no, it would look like she had something to hide. If she said yes, she would be walking into their trap. She had no lawyer, no one to advise her. It was just her, alone, against the full force of the Harper family and, it seemed, the Chicago Police Department. She opened the door wider, her movements stiff and robotic. Come in. They sat in the cavernous living room, the two officers on the plush sofa, Nora perched on the edge of an armchair opposite them. The detective's questions were a relentless barrage, each one designed to trip her up, to make her look guilty. So, you admit to using Mr. Harper's card at the restaurant? He left it for me. It was a joint account. But he wasn't present when you made the transaction. Is that correct? He had just left. He told me he was going to the washroom. And you didn't find it strange that he was gone for so long? Of course I did. I was worried. Did you make any attempt to contact him before using the card? Yes, I called him. I texted him. He didn't answer. Each answer felt like a confession, each detail twisted into something sinister. They asked about the watch, about his other belongings. They asked about her finances, her allowance, her freelance work. They were building a case, brick by brick, painting a picture of a desperate, greedy woman who had been cut off and had decided to take what she believed she was owed. It was a masterpiece of cruelty. They had taken every detail of their life together and weaponized it against her. After what felt like an eternity, the detective closed his notebook. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Harper. Or is it Ms. Reed now? The question was a deliberate jab, a reminder of her precarious position. My name is Nora Harper, she said, her voice shaking with barely suppressed rage. I am his wife. The detective just gave her a small, pitying smile. We'll be in touch. As she closed the door behind them, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. This was no longer just a marital dispute. This was a war for her freedom, for her reputation, for the future of her child. They weren't just trying to divorce her. They were trying to annihilate her. She sank to the floor, her back against the heavy oak door, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she didn't cry. She was too terrified to cry. The press of charges, the cold reality of a potential criminal record, had shocked her into a state of chilling clarity. They thought they had her cornered. They thought she was a mouse in their trap. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous. And Nora Harper, née Reed, was done being the prey. The fight for her life had just begun. The detective's visit shattered the last vestiges of Nora's disbelief. This was real. The threat wasn't just of poverty or public shame. It was of a prison cell. The thought of giving birth in custody, of her child being born into a world where its mother was a convicted felon, was a horror beyond anything she could have imagined. That horror became her fuel. She had 1 week to vacate the house, 1 week to find a place to live, to find a lawyer, and to start fighting back. The clock was ticking, and the Harper empire had a formidable head start. Her first call was to the one person she knew she could trust implicitly, her older sister, Maya. Maya was everything Nora wasn't, a fierce, pragmatic ER doctor who lived in a cramped but cozy apartment in Wicker Park and had never trusted Mason from the start. She'd called him the Ken doll, all polished surface with nothing underneath. Nora had always defended him, but now, Maya's words echoed in her mind with prophetic clarity. She dialed the number, her hands still trembling. When Maya answered, her voice brisk and professional, Nora broke down. The whole sordid story came pouring out in a torrent of sobs and fragmented sentences. The dinner, the abandonment, Beatrice's venom, the police. Maya listened without interruption, a skill she'd honed in the chaos of the emergency room. When Nora was finished, her voice raw and spent, Maya's response was immediate and unequivocal. "I'm coming to get you. Pack a bag, just the essentials. Your documents, your laptop, clothes. Don't take anything they could claim was a gift. We'll figure the rest out later. I'll be there in 30 minutes. The calm authority in her sister's voice was a lifeline. For the first time in 24 hours, Nora didn't feel completely alone. She moved through the house on autopilot, pulling a suitcase from the back of her closet. Her old, battered suitcase from college, not the designer luggage Mason had bought her. She packed her research papers, her laptop, the few pieces of jewelry she'd inherited from her grandmother, and simple, comfortable clothes. She walked past the designer gowns and diamond earrings with a sense of detachment, as if they belonged to another woman. When Maya arrived, she took one look at Nora's pale, tear-streaked face and enveloped her in a fierce hug. "We're going to fight this, Nora," she said, her voice fierce. "We're going to burn them to the ground." Maya's apartment was a sanctuary of normalcy. It was small and a little messy, with stacks of medical journals on the coffee table and a cat named Murphy, who regarded Nora with sleepy indifference. It was a world away from the cold, sterile perfection of the Lincoln Park brownstone. Here, Nora could finally breathe. That evening, over takeout pizza that Maya had insisted on, they started to strategize. Maya, with her logical, diagnostic mind, laid out their priorities. First, a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, a shark. Someone who isn't afraid to go up against the Harpers' legal army. Second, we need to get ahead of their narrative. They're painting you as a gold-digging adulteress. We need to prove you're not. Third, and most important, is the baby. We need irrefutable proof of paternity, and we need to make sure they can't tamper with it. The task seemed insurmountable. The Harpers had unlimited resources. Nora had a few $1,000s in her personal savings account, and a sister who worked double shifts at the hospital. "How can we possibly afford a lawyer who can take them on?" Nora asked, the despair creeping back into her voice. "Let me worry about that," Maya said, her expression determined. "I have some savings, and I know some people. A doctor I work with, her husband is a partner at a big downtown firm. It's a long shot, but I can at least get a name, a recommendation." The next morning, while Maya was at the hospital, Nora started her own research. She couldn't just sit by and wait. She needed to be proactive. She started digging into Mason's life, his business, anything that might give her some leverage. She'd been so willfully ignorant during their marriage, content to let him handle the finances, the investments, the details of his corporate world. She had believed it was a sign of trust. Now she saw it for what it was. A way to keep her powerless. She logged into the joint account, the one he'd left her the debit card for. To her surprise, it was still active. There was a balance of a few $1,000s. It was a pittance to him, but to her, it was a lifeline. She immediately transferred the entire amount to her personal savings account, an account he didn't know existed. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Then, she started looking through the transaction history. It was mostly her expenses, groceries, clothes, lunches. But as she scrolled back, further and further, a pattern began to emerge. Regular payments, thousands of dollars at a time, to a single recipient, a private investigation firm. The payments had started about 6 months ago, right around the time Mason had started to become distant. He had been investigating her for months. The realization sent a chill down her spine. He had been building a case against her long before he walked out of that restaurant. He hadn't just found out the truth, as Beatrice claimed. He had been trying to manufacture it. Her mind raced. What could he have been looking for? An affair? She had been completely faithful. Financial misdeeds? She had no access to his real money. She was a model wife, a perfect trophy. So what was he searching for? The answer, when it came to her, was so simple, so obvious. She couldn't believe she hadn't seen it before. He wasn't looking for something she had done. He was looking for something she was. He was digging into her past, her family, her life before him. Why? That evening, when Maya came home, exhausted from a 12-hour shift, Nora showed her the bank statements. Maya's eyes narrowed as she looked at the payments to the PI firm. "The snake!" she breathed. "He was planning this all along." She then handed Nora a business card. "I got a name. A woman named Sarah Chen. My friend says she's a dragon, specializes in high-conflict divorces. She's expensive, but she offers a free consultation. I booked you an appointment for tomorrow morning." The law office of Chen and Associates was on the 40th floor of a skyscraper in the Loop, with panoramic views of the city. Sarah Chen was a petite woman in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an air of calm, unshakable confidence. She listened to Nora's story without interruption, her expression unreadable. When Nora was finished, Sarah leaned back in her chair, her fingers steepled. "This is a classic narcissistic discard, Ms. Reed," she said, her voice calm and measured. "The love bombing, the isolation, the devaluation, and finally, the calculated cruel exit. The false accusations, the smear campaign. It's all from the same playbook. The Harpers are trying to bully you into submission. They're counting on you being too scared and too broke to fight back. I am scared," Nora admitted, her voice trembling slightly, "and I am broke." "You have more than you think," Sarah said, a small smile playing on her lips. "You have the truth, and you have something they want to be rid of, a legitimate heir to the Harper fortune. That makes you a threat, and it gives you leverage." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes locking with Nora's. "The criminal charges are a scare tactic. They're baseless, and they know it. We can get them dismissed. The real fight is the divorce and the paternity of your child. We need to get a court-ordered paternity test immediately, and we need to file for divorce before they do so we can control the narrative." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "This will be a nasty, brutal fight, Nora. They will dig into every corner of your life. They will try to break you. Are you ready for that?" Nora thought of her unborn child, of the life she wanted for them, a life free from the poison of the Harper family. She thought of the girl she used to be, the one who was strong and independent and full of hope. She wanted to be that girl again. "Yes," Nora said, her voice clear and strong. "I'm ready." Sarah Chen smiled, a genuine warm smile this time. "Good. Because I have a feeling we're going to find some very interesting skeletons in the Harper family closet." She picked up her phone. "Let's get to work." In that moment, sitting in the sun-drenched office high above the city, Nora felt a flicker of hope. She had found her unlikely ally. The dragon was on her side. The war had begun. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal strategy and emotional fortification. Sarah Chen moved with breathtaking speed and precision. Within 48 hours, she had filed a motion to dismiss the bogus criminal charges, filed for divorce on Nora's behalf, citing irreconcilable differences, and, most critically, petitioned the court for an emergency order compelling Mason to submit to a paternity test. "We need to strike hard and fast," Sarah explained during one of their late-night strategy sessions in her office, surrounded by takeout containers and stacks of legal documents. They're used to being the aggressors. We're flipping the script. Now they're on the defensive. The Harper family's response was swift and predictable. Their legal team, a phalanx of grim-faced men from a white-shoe law firm, filed a counter-motion to block the paternity test, citing Mason's unavailability due to his extended business in Singapore and reiterating their slanderous claims about Nora's infidelity. "They're stalling," Sarah said with a grim satisfaction, tapping the document with her pen. "And that tells me everything I need to know. They're terrified of that test." While the lawyers battled in court, Nora and Maya focused on their own investigation. Armed with the name of the PI firm from the bank statements, Nora went down a rabbit hole of online research. The firm, a discreet agency called Veritas Solutions, specialized in asset protection and due diligence for high-net-worth individuals. Their website was slick and corporate, but a little digging revealed a darker reputation. They were known for their aggressive, borderline unethical tactics, for finding leverage where none existed. Nora's mind kept returning to the same question. What were they looking for? If it wasn't an affair, what secret from her past could be so damaging that Mason would go to such extreme lengths to use it against her? Her past was an open book. She'd grown up in a quiet, middle-class family in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Her parents were retired school teachers. She had no criminal record, no secret debts, no hidden scandals. She was, for all intents and purposes, boringly normal. "Maybe it's not about you, Nora," Maya suggested one evening, as they were poring over Nora's research. "Maybe it's about them. Maybe they're afraid of something you might find out." The thought was a revelation. All this time she had assumed she was the target. But what if she was just collateral damage in a much bigger war? What if the secret wasn't hers, but theirs? The focus of her investigation shifted. She started digging into the Harper family, into the history of their logistics empire, Harper Worldwide. On the surface, it was a classic American success story. Mason's grandfather had started the company with a single truck after World War II and had built it into a global powerhouse. But as Nora peeled back the layers of glowing press releases and fawning business articles, she began to find cracks in the facade. She found old newspaper articles about a bitter family dispute after the grandfather's death, a lawsuit filed by his brother who claimed he had been cheated out of his share of the company. The lawsuit had been quietly settled out of court. She found whispers of shady business dealings in the company's early days, rumors of connections to organized crime, of union-busting tactics. But it was all circumstantial, old gossip with no hard evidence to back it up. The real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. One afternoon, a plain manila envelope arrived for Nora at Maya's apartment. There was no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a typewritten message. "They are afraid you will find out about the first wife." The words sent a jolt through Nora. The first wife. Mason had never mentioned being married before. As far as she knew, she was his one and only. Beatrice had certainly never spoken of another daughter-in-law. "It has to be a trick," Maya said, her voice laced with suspicion. "A trap. They're trying to send you on a wild goose chase." "Maybe," Nora said, her mind racing. "But it doesn't feel like their style. Their style is a sledgehammer. This is subtle." She showed the note to Sarah Chen the next day. The lawyer's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. "This is it," she said, her voice hushed with excitement. "This is the skeleton. A secret first wife? In a family as image-obsessed as the Harpers? This is gold, Nora." Sarah's team of paralegals and investigators, a group of whip-smart young women Nora had come to admire, descended upon the public records archives with the tenacity of bloodhounds. They searched marriage licenses, divorce decrees, property records, anything that could corroborate the anonymous tip. For days, they found nothing. It was as if the woman had never existed. The Harper family had done an expert job of scrubbing her from the records. But they had made one mistake. A young paralegal named Maria, a woman with a genius for finding needles in digital haystacks, discovered a property transfer from 25 years ago. A small house in a working-class suburb of Milwaukee. The property had been transferred from Mason Harper to a woman named Isabella Rossi. The transfer had been signed just a week before Mason had officially enrolled in his prestigious East Coast boarding school. He would have been 18 at the time. The name meant nothing to Nora. But a quick search of Wisconsin court records revealed the truth. Isabella Rossi had filed for divorce from Mason Harper 25 years ago, citing extreme cruelty. The divorce had been sealed, the records hidden from public view. But the property transfer was the one loose thread they had failed to snip. And then came the final devastating piece of the puzzle. Another search, this time of birth records in Milwaukee County. A boy, named Leo Rossi, had been born to Isabella Rossi 7 months after the divorce was finalized. No father was listed on the birth certificate. Mason had a son. A 24-year-old son he had abandoned, just as he was now abandoning her and their unborn child. The revelation was staggering. This was the secret. This was the shame that the image-obsessed Harper family had buried for a quarter of a century. A teenage marriage to a working-class girl. A secret child. It was the ultimate stain on their pristine reputation. And now, Nora understood. Her middle-class background, her lack of a pedigree, her independence, it had all been a terrifying echo of the past for Beatrice. She saw in Nora another Isabella, another threat to the family's carefully constructed dynasty. And the baby? Her baby was another illegitimate heir who could one day lay claim to the Harper fortune. This wasn't just about her. It was about history repeating itself. And Beatrice was determined to stop it, no matter the cost. "They weren't investigating you to find dirt, Nora," Sarah said, her voice grim. "They were investigating you to see if you knew, to see if you had any connection to Isabella or her son. When you got pregnant, they panicked. They had to get rid of you before you got too entrenched, before you found out the truth and used it against them. The cruelty of it all was breathtaking. They had destroyed her life, tried to ruin her reputation, tried to take her child, all to protect a lie." "What do we do now?" Nora asked, her voice shaking with a cold, hard rage. Sarah Chen smiled, a slow, dangerous smile. "Now," she said, "now we drop the bomb." She picked up her phone and dialed the number for the Harpers' lead attorney. "Mr. Davenport, Sarah Chen calling. I think it's time we had a real conversation. I have a few new names I'd like to discuss with you. The first one is Isabella Rossi. The second is Leo." The silence on the other end of the line, Sarah later told Nora, was the most satisfying sound she had ever heard. The facade had cracked. And now, they were going to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The discovery of Mason's first family, his secret wife, his abandoned son, was the seismic event that shifted the entire landscape of the war. The Harpers' legal team, once so arrogant and dismissive, went into a state of panicked silence. Their motions were withdrawn. Their aggressive tactics ceased. They were back on their heels, and Sarah Chen pressed the advantage relentlessly. She arranged a settlement conference at her office. It was a neutral ground, but it felt like Nora's territory. She was no longer the frightened victim. She was the one holding all the cards. The day of the conference, Nora chose her outfit with care. Not a power suit, but a simple, elegant maternity dress in a soft blue. She wanted them to see her, to see the life she was carrying. She wanted them to look at her belly and be reminded of the son Mason had already thrown away. Mason was there. It was the first time she had seen him since he'd walked out of Aurelia. He looked thinner, his face etched with lines of stress she'd never seen before. The confident, charming man she had married was gone, replaced by a haunted, hollowed-out stranger. He refused to meet her eyes. his gaze fixed on a point on the far wall. Beatrice was there too, a statue of fury carved from ice. Her face was a mask of hatred, but for the first time, Nora could see the fear behind it. The fear of exposure, of her perfect world crumbling to dust. Their lead lawyer, a silver-haired man named Davenport, began with a blustering attempt at control, but Sarah cut him off before he could finish his first sentence. "Let's dispense with the theatrics, shall we, Mr. Davenport?" Sarah said, her voice cool and sharp. "We're not here to negotiate the terms of a simple divorce. We're here to discuss the consequences of 25 years of fraud, conspiracy, and emotional abuse." She laid out their terms, her voice never rising, each word a carefully placed stone in the wall of their demands. First, the immediate dismissal of all criminal charges, with a formal letter of apology from the Chicago PD for the harassment. Second, a public retraction of all defamatory statements made against Nora. Third, a court-enforced paternity test for Nora's child to be conducted the day after the birth. And then she delivered the final devastating blow. "And fourth," she said, her eyes locking on Beatrice, "a trust fund, a substantial irrevocable trust fund to be established not only for Nora's child, but also for Mason's first son, Leo Rossi." The name hung in the air, an unexploded bomb. Mason flinched as if he'd been struck. Beatrice's face, already pale, went ashen. "This is blackmail," Davenport sputtered, his face flushing with anger. "No," Sarah corrected him calmly. "This is justice. You see, we've been in contact with Isabella Rossi, a lovely woman. She's had a hard life, raising her son alone, with no support from his father. She was young and scared when you forced her to sign that NDA, when you paid her off and sealed the records. But she's not scared anymore. And her son, Leo, a bright young man who has spent his whole life wondering who his father is very interested in hearing his story. A story I'm sure the Chicago Tribune would be fascinated to tell. The threat was clear. They could settle, quietly and privately, or they could face a public relations nightmare that would destroy the Harper family name forever. Beatrice finally broke her silence. Her voice was a low, venomous hiss. "You will not do this. You will not destroy my family." Nora looked at the woman who had tried to ruin her, and for the first time, she didn't feel anger or fear. She felt a profound, aching pity. "Your family was already destroyed, Beatrice," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "It was destroyed by its own secrets, its own cruelty. I'm just turning on the lights." She finally turned to Mason, forcing him to look at her. His eyes were filled with a toxic cocktail of shame, resentment, and self-pity. "Why, Mason?" she asked, the question that had haunted her for weeks. "Why not just ask for a divorce? Why all of this? The humiliation, the lies?" He looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "My mother," he began, his voice weak. "She said you were just like her, that you would try to trap me, to take everything." "Like Isabella?" Nora pressed, her voice gentle but relentless. "Did you ever love her, Mason? Or was she just a mistake you had to erase?" He didn't answer. He just stared at his hands, a broken man, a puppet whose strings had finally been cut. And in that moment, Nora knew the truth. He had never loved her. He had never loved anyone. He was a hollow man, a reflection of his mother's ambitions and fears. The settlement was signed before the end of the day. The Harpers agreed to all of their terms. The war was over. A few weeks later, Nora stood in the empty Lincoln Park brownstone one last time. She had won. She had financial security for herself and her children. Both of them. She had her reputation back. She was free. But it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tragedy. She had arranged, through Sarah, to meet Isabella and Leo. She wanted them to know the truth. She wanted Leo to have the chance to decide for himself if he ever wanted to meet the man who was his father. She placed her hand on her belly, where her own child was growing, kicking with a strength that mirrored her own. this child would know the truth. This child would be raised with love, not lies. This child would be free from the poison of the Harper legacy. She walked out of the house and didn't look back. She was no longer Nora Harper, the millionaire's wife. She was Nora Reed, a mother, a survivor, a woman who had walked through the fire and emerged not unscathed but whole. Her future was her own, a blank canvas waiting for her to paint it. And she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it would be beautiful. Conclusion: redemption and new beginnings. Months later, Nora gave birth to a healthy baby girl with a shock of dark hair and eyes the color of a summer sky. She named her Hope. She had met with Isabella and Leo. The meeting was emotional, a strange and beautiful collision of past and future. Isabella was a warm, resilient woman who had built a good life for herself and her son. Leo was a kind, intelligent young man with Mason's eyes, but none of his hollowness. He was curious about his father, but not bitter. He had been raised with love, and it showed. Nora had created a new family, a chosen family, bound not by blood, but by a shared history of survival. She, Maya, Isabella, Leo, and baby Hope. They were a strange and wonderful constellation, a testament to the power of truth and the resilience of the human heart. Mason had disappeared from public life. The Harper Empire was still standing, but its reputation was tarnished. Beatrice was a recluse, a queen in a gilded cage of her own making. One day, a letter arrived for Nora. It was from Mason. It was not an apology, not really. It was a rambling, self-pitying account of his life, of the pressures he had faced, the expectations he had tried to live up to. But in the last line, there was a flicker of something real. "I hope she has your strength," he wrote, "and your heart." Nora read the letter and then put it away. It was a ghost from a life that was no longer hers. She looked at her daughter, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and she smiled. The future was unwritten, and for the first time in a long time, she was not afraid. She was ready. Nora's story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals can come from the people we trust the most. But it's also a story of incredible strength, of a woman who refused to be silenced, who fought back against a powerful and ruthless family to protect her child and reclaim her life. She found justice not through revenge, but through the truth. Her journey from a gilded cage to a life of authentic freedom shows us that even in our darkest moments, we have the power to rewrite our own story. If Nora's fight for survival and redemption moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear a story of hope and resilience. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life stories that will touch your heart and make you think. Thank you for watching, or